Welcome to Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. My name is Chris Lenois, and today we're visiting with the two incumbent representatives from Windham District 4, which represent the towns of Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster. I'd like to welcome to the studio David Deen and Mike Mrowicki. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Now, we're doing these for an opportunity for viewers out there to get to know the different candidates or remind them of the candidates who have currently been serving in office. Both of you pretty long-term incumbents at this point. I was just confirming right before we went on that, Mike, you've been in the House since 2008.
Yep.
And David, you've been in since 1991 in the House, and then you also served a term in the State Senate prior to that. So I'm going to start with you with this question. Seniority, you get to go first here. But certainly this is a year where there's going to be a lot of turnover in Montpelier on the state level and in some of the House and Senate seats as well. It's certainly a position that you do out of passion for service. It's certainly a position you don't do for the compensation as citizen legislators. So what keeps you coming back term after term after term?
Well, my agenda from all the way back in the 80s when I was in the Senate has been to clean up the waters of the state of Vermont. And it's been a long, somewhat frustrating experience, but I am determined to outlast the opponents to clean water and see that my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren have clean water here in the state of Vermont. As you mentioned, there's a huge turnover. We have the governor, lieutenant governor, President Pro Tem of the Senate, and Speaker of the House, as well as a third of the House members turning over this year, which is in terms of the House, that's average, having a third new members. And quite honestly, with my years of service, I'm getting to be institutional memory for a lot of the environmental protection laws that we have. Because when a governor changes, so does the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Commissioner of Forest Parks Recreation, because all governors want their own people and completely understand that. But with that kind of change, someone like me with the memory and the experience of having gone through all of that work becomes important because people could forget, and backsliding is pretty easy. And so I hope to be there this term to move not much in the way of a new agenda, but to see that the Clean Water Act that we passed in 2015, we're in the first year of implementation, gets carried forward. It's a 20-year program. And so I want to see that continues to get moved forward.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear how a lot of the same things that got you involved continue to keep you involved. Wondering, Mike, for you, if that's a similar kind of arc where a lot of the issues that were concerning you in 2008 that got you involved are still continuing today.
They are to a degree. I work in human services. I've been concerned with how those without voices get a voice in our government. People who literally, their lives depend on the generosity of strangers, the kindness of strangers. And it's important for me to help define our quality of life by how we treat the least among us. Going back, though, one of the ways I think I've evolved seeing the big picture now is to understand that human services don't do well unless the economy does well. And this is where I think our governor and our president deserve a lot of credit. They had a huge economic mess dumped in their laps. Wall Street dumped their mess onto Main Street, and we've had to clean it up. And the president, our governor, Democratic legislature working together have helped clean up that mess, which is why I don't understand the people who are talking about going back to those same old policies that got us in trouble. You know, the House in Washington just passed a repeal of the Dodd-Frank bill, which is to keep in check all those financial problems that got us in trouble in the first place. And circling back, as I said, a good economy means that we'll have the resources to take care of human services. And it's important to understand right here what our governor has done as well is to promote a clean, green economy, clean, green jobs. We lead the nation in the percentage of green jobs. And I think the green economy is the economy of the future. I want to piggyback on something David said, though, because we hear a lot of people talking about how they want clean water, except, well, we can't spend money on it. That's giving lip service to it. You know, there's a photograph going around the internet of a message board out in front of a store, and it says, "Hey, Joe, get in here and pay your bill." And I think that's the environment talking to us right now and saying, hey, we got to pay the bill. That's the only way we're going to clean up our lakes, our rivers, our drinking water, and keep them clean for our children and their children to come. It's going to cost money. There's no way around it. Anybody that tells you that otherwise is being loose with the truth, as we say. So I applaud David with what he's been doing. I support what he's doing, and I'm out there also to work with what our people need, kids especially. Now, going back to my first year, the first bill that I spoke to on the floor, introduced to my fellow House members, was a bill about protecting children from lead paint. Who could be against protecting children from lead paint? Well, we found out.
Yeah,
and our opponents in this election, Mr. Cutler, led the charge to try and kill that bill. They filled the State House with their group to try and, at a public hearing, to try and kill the bill. They saw this bill to protect children from lead paint as a backdoor attempt to prevent them from being able to make their own bullets. Well, nothing was further from the truth. We did pass the bill, but I think it shows you the differences in the candidates right here. Yeah. I'm going to continue to advocate for children. I'm going to continue to advocate. So we have problems about lead paint. We have old housing stock in Vermont, and we need to make sure there's teeth in that bill and be vigilant about that. Children are our future, and that's why I'm always going to be an advocate for our children and our future.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the upcoming session and the leadership change, I do want to ask you a couple questions about the outgoing governor, Peter Shumlin, who's from your neck of the woods there. And as we were talking a little bit right before going on air, you images are both gracing a website from the Republican State Leadership Committee tying you to Governor Shumlin, the Shumlin legacy of higher taxes and less local control. And certainly some of those questions may have played into the outcome of the election last time being as close as it was. And there may have been other issues as well that I know when I spoke to many more progressive Democratic-minded people weren't necessarily happy with how Governor Shumlin was doing things, and that kind of caused them not to vote and made the vote between Shumlin and Scott Milne as close as it was. From your perspective of working with the governor over his terms, are there things that you're particularly proud of? Do you shy away from being aligned with Governor Shumlin? Let me start with you, David.
Well, one of the things I really find interesting is that he has vetoed 2 bills that have come out of my committee. And in terms of individual committees, I think I may hold the record for his service. And you can talk with Michael about this also, but we change administration stuff all the time. They come in with a proposal, and we take some testimony from people who are affected, from experts, and we change it. And so it just sort of is, and it feels ironic to have someone charging that, we're just right tied to Peter Shumlin. Peter and I were district mates. We both served in the House at the same time from the legislative district that Michael and I now represent, and we fought then too. In terms of, and I'm not quite sure what the charges are, and this is a usual tactic. Blanket charges without specifics sort of get thrown around. So we're being tied to the Shumlin administration. lowest unemployment rate in New England other than New Hampshire, one of the lowest in the country, rising personal income, a stabilized tax burden because the governor absolutely refused to consider any broad increase in broad-based taxes. And so again, when we're held up and these Facebook things keep popping up as being tied to Shumlin, okay, I'll buy that.
You're fine with that.
I'm fine with that. We've increased incomes. We've held taxes steady. We've balanced the budget every year. And we've been willing to make the tough decisions when, in fact, revenues don't quite meet projections. Okay, we go in, we pull back. We don't create a deficit that will carry on into the future. We pull back and somehow manage to balance that budget. So go ahead, tie me to Peter.
How about you, Mike? Is there anything that you find yourself parting ways with the governor on in points of view?
Well, we don't agree on everything. Nobody does. And I think the biggest thing that Peter had going against him was his decision to pull back from single-payer health care. And that kind of became a perfect storm of opposition because a lot of us, including me, a lot of more progressive thinkers still believe that's the way to go. The numbers didn't work then, and I understand the numbers have to work. I think that was the biggest piece contributing to that. When you talk about taxes, the Tax Foundation is probably the most conservative group out there talking about taxes, and if you look at their numbers, Vermont has the lowest overall tax burden of any of our neighbors, including New Hampshire. So we have lower taxes than New Hampshire, and yet we get painted with a pretty broad brush. The other ironic thing, I believe, is that these internet ads our opponents are putting up are being paid by the Koch brothers. It's a Washington, D.C. PAC that's paying for these advertisements, and you talk about outside money coming into the state. I'd say the Koch brothers are the ultimate in that, and they're going to dump a lot of money in Vermont, and obviously we're being focused in a way I'm honored that they think that that I should be focused on, and they're going to throw money at me, but I'm ready to take that challenge. As far as what the governor's done, I agree with David. When you look at the economy that Governor Shumlin inherited, we were in a mess. He has righted the ship, put us on course, and I think we're, again, talking about the clean, green economy. This is the future for Vermont, for a lot of the country. You don't have to go far to look at what Governor Shumlin has done right here in Brattleboro. You look at the River Garden. It was Peter who brought the money home to rebuild what was the burned-out Rite Aid drugstore there. If you look at what's happened at the Latches, his support has always been there. And of course, Brooks House. I mean, what would Brattleboro be like if Brooks House didn't have those anchor tenants of CCV and Vermont Tech? That was the governor who moved those things to get into here. And all around the state, he has been working on both growing our downtowns, conserving land, providing housing, growing the economy. I think in retrospect, and that's not even talking about all the damage that we repaired after Hurricane Irene, including the bridge in North Westminster, where I think it was $400,000.
$297,000.
$300,000 that we got for, David did a lot of the work on this, but it took the governor's approval. Things don't go through the budget without the governor's approval. Took that money off the books for Westminster. I mean, that's legacy to be proud of.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. There's a chance after November 8th that you'll be working with a governor from the other side of the aisle. Phil Scott, the lieutenant governor, polling very well in the state, and some of his ideas to make Vermont more affordable, including tying the budget growth to different things. I think there was an adjusted wage as well as some other economic growth factors, things like that. When you hear plans like that being offered from the Republican side, wondering your thoughts on those and if those are things you can support.
Well, again, this is broad brush. This is 30,000 foot ideas and whatever. I want to see the budget that the governor brings forward. I want to know which programs he, presuming it's Phil Scott.
Yeah. I'll ask you a question about Minter in a second.
Yeah, but put it down on paper. Don't give me rhetoric, all right? I've been through this and a lot. And your priorities are determined by where you spend money. So, is he going to reduce the fight against opioid addiction? Is he going to reduce the investment in our infrastructure? What is he going to do to create these reductions in the budget? And once we know what his priorities are, we'll talk about whether they match mine. I can't react at this point. So you would
necessarily reject a reduction in one of those programs out of hand?
No. The legislative process, if it is done right, is a conversation and a discussion. You can disagree, but the entire rules of the legislative process are set up to give everybody their opportunity to be heard, but allow the will of the majority to move the agenda forward. And, I've been in a lot of conversations. I've won a few and lost a lot of others. But I understand that that's the process. So let's see what he puts down on paper.
Right. Are there any non-starters for you, Mike? I mean, a lot of the things they'd be looking at to cut perhaps might be things that come through your Human Services Committee.
It could be, but I want to just go back a bit because we have been practicing fiscal austerity. We've balanced the budget every year. We have AAA bond ratings based on our fiscal policies. Moody's and those other bonding companies, they don't just loan money out or give you ratings based on bad fiscal policies. So we have been fiscally responsible. And the other thing is that you'll hear the opposition talk about the Shumlin administration spending cumulatively. In the first few years, we were spending at a higher rate to pay for the repair of Tropical Storm Irene. Now, what's the alternative? Not to do that? I mean,
leave people isolated out there.
I don't know how you get around cleaning up after a tropical storm without spending money. It goes back to that, hey, Joe, get in here and pay your bill.
Right.
The bill comes due, you have to pay it.
Yeah. Let's turn to Sue Minter, and if she were elected governor, and something she said at the WDEV interview in Tunbridge, where
by herself?
She referred, yes, the debate, air quotes, but she referred to the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission suggestions from a few years ago. That's actually something that Republicans have seized on here to try and talk about her desire to raise a lot of revenues through extended taxes on services. In other words, right now we tax sales on goods, but she wants to do it on services. If that is something that she proposed, is that something that the two of you would support?
Again, it would be a matter of where would that money go? What would it do? Will it replace other sources of revenue as opposed to being an add-on? There are a lot of things to figure out. And that sort of brings up the whole notion of a carbon tax, and I believe you wanted to talk about it. Yeah. The whole notion of what those of us that are supporting this want to do is we want to tax things we don't want, and we don't want to tax things we do want. In terms of the bills that have been brought forward, if we raise a carbon tax, in fact, we would reduce the sales tax. We would reduce property taxes. This is not an add-on kind of situation. So in terms of what the recommendations were in that report, some of them are good ideas because that's exactly what they do. They replace other taxes that are taxing the wrong things. And so it's not like anything would be a non-starter. Again, we're back to this is a conversation about what are the priorities of our state.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up on that, just in terms of getting the message out about, because a similar thing with the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission, right? There's certain things that would be changed for the better for taxes, including lowering that sales tax rate, taxing income on adjusted gross versus how it's done now. Similarly, the message about the carbon tax, those offsets really aren't getting out there. Is that a concern that the voters aren't aware of the complexities of how these things are assessed?
Again, I'm in this for the long haul. Tomorrow, the day after we're taping this, I am meeting with legislators from the other New England states who are interested in the carbon tax as a way of reducing our carbon footprint in the sector where we have done nothing, and that's automobiles, that's gasoline. That's the largest part of what's going up into the air right now. I agree with even the critics of what we have proposed. We can't do it alone. We can't go alone in Vermont. We're just too small a part of the overall market. But legislators from New York and the other New England states will be at this meeting tomorrow to talk about some kind of uniform strategy in the legislative bodies in New England. And all of us are talking about replacing other taxes in terms of things that we do want that we're taxing. Let's tax what we don't want.
Right on. Mike, you and I have had conversations before in my radio program about wealth inequality here in Vermont. You've talked about changing income tax structure in that way. My sense is that is your preference versus something like Sue Minter talking about sales tax and this Blue Ribbon Commission. But what would you think if she were to propose something like this around taxing services?
Sure. What we're talking about is tax reform, a tax structure that reflects the 21st century, not the 18th century manufacturing base that New England used to be the hub of the country around. I think we need to come into the 21st century and realize economic justice depends on a more fair tax system, and this is one way of looking at it. Senator Sanders has certainly brought this up again and again through the campaign, and I agree. Economic justice depends upon a fair tax system, and what we're talking about here, and the carbon tax is just one piece of that, is reducing the income tax, reducing property taxes, reducing the sales tax, and then moving taxes on something regressive such as carbon and our automobile use. In Vermont, the biggest part of our carbon footprint is automobile use. I don't know anybody, well, there's a few people that are still denying global warming, but it's here. Anybody that denies it is really not looking at the science. Perhaps they don't believe in science. I don't know, but it's here. We need to do something about it. Not just for ourselves, but for our kids. And I had a great piece of an educational moment with some students, with the 350.org high school students that came to the State House. And this one young student said to me, "We have another word for global warming, our future." And when people tell us that they don't believe in global warming, they're saying they don't believe in our future. And when they say we don't have to do anything about global warming, they're saying they don't want to do anything about our future. This is our children's future we're talking about. We have to do something.
Yeah, well, let's use that global warming to pivot to another issue about renewable energy siting. I think that's one when you hear about local control. They talk about the siting plans for either wind or solar, and some of the conversations that happen in the State House around that, including a veto from the governor, special session for you all to go back and kind of fix that legislation a little bit. Is this settled issue for you in terms of how the legislation laid out? Are you happy with the renewable energy siting as it stands? Since you're shaking your head,
no. My answer is no. I had hoped, as did many of us, that the local municipalities would be given additional authorities or recognition or influence within the permitting process than the bill ended up doing. The good part of what passed is the requirement that municipalities and the regional plans in an area should have an energy siting standards as part of those plans, and that is all well and good. But whether or not the work at the local level, the work at the regional level counts in terms of the process for review under 248, which is the Public Service Board review of development, is only allowed if the Public Service Department, which is another arm of government, approves those plans. I am one of the co-authors of what was known as Act 200, which was a major rewrite of planning in this state back in 1988. And I became convinced through 2 years of work on that legislation that people at the local level are smart. They know what they want for their community. I don't think Vermonters will, at the local level, if you give them influence in the permitting process, are going to make decisions that we don't want any solar at all. No solar. They're not going to do that. Vermonters aren't going to do that. So I'm a little disappointed with where we ended up, even with the fix in terms of being called back in a special session.
To the local side.
To the local side. I want to see more influence on the local side. I want planning to make it worth people's time to get involved with those activities at the local level. That you increase participation, you're going to increase the smarts of communities in terms of what they're offering for solar and wind development.
Yeah. Mike, you're nodding your head, but at the same time, more local control, more of these conversations slows down the process, exacerbates global warming.
This is an area where we have to keep going back. We did take a step forward to help a little bit more local control on this. And I think David makes a good point. We need that input. Sometimes the best decisions need to take time. I don't care whether it's the environment, education. We need to take our time and make the best decision, because these are decisions that are going to affect future generations, not just us. And that's the legislative process. An idea gets put out, sometimes we have to come back and revisit it. Net metering is something similar. We've been encouraging local homeowners, local small arrays, through net metering. Solar is going to be an important part of our energy mix going forward. We want to continue to encourage that. There's some changes being proposed right now by the Public Service Board, which some people see as not being as generous with net metering. I think we're going to have to revisit that and have some more conversations around that, maybe legislatively, maybe in other ways, but net metering is something that has worked. I mean, it's one of the reasons Windham County and Vermont are leading the country in solar arrays. There are other countries, other states where the legislatures are heavily influenced by people like the Koch brothers that have banned solar on homes. They're banning alternative energy and conservation programs because the Koch brothers are oil and coal producers. That's not the way to go. I think we need to keep that process moving, and sometimes it's going to take a little longer, but we want to make the right decision. And yeah, global warming is an urgent concern. There's a lot of things we can do with that. We've got a park and ride in Putney. Most of the places around here do. That's the next thing we need to do, is get more cars off the road. And between ride shares and other forms of transportation, that's another way we can address our carbon footprint here.
Yeah, similar to renewable energy siting and the context of local control.
Right. Without the local input, without the local planning and whatever, it's the investment companies that are driving where these facilities are located. It is not the community. So we need the power, and we need it in this way, but it really ought to be our communities that are driving where these developments will be going forward, not private capital. And the biggest driver in our county, it doesn't affect necessarily our towns, but the biggest driver in our county is a Spanish corporation. No, I'm sorry. Vermonters, this is our state, so Vermonters really ought to be, if not driving the bus, at least providing the roadmap where people are going to drive that alternative energy bus.
Yeah. I want to ask also local control in the context of Act 46 and education reform, another issue that is slow when we talk about how we reform education here in this state, and certainly concerns about it that cross party lines. I've heard things from fellow Democrats as well as Republicans who are concerned about the way it's going here in Windham County. Other communities seem to be embracing it. Do you see this as coming back up in the next legislative session as an issue you're going to have to deal with?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the notion of an idea is there. And it's funny, both supporters and opponents were at a meeting I was at earlier today, and they agreed. The central idea is there. It always is a matter of how you actually implement something, and that's where the discussion is going to be taking place in the upcoming session.
Do you think needs more local control?
Yes.
Yeah. Than the law currently allows for?
Yes. But the notion of the equality of educational opportunity needs to be strengthened. Local input into that process needs to be strengthened from where we are right now. And I'll turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, is this a tweak or is this an overhaul in your estimation?
What I think we need to focus on is education, and Act 46 focuses on governance. We just got some numbers in Vermont that we have good educational outcomes until you start drilling down into the lower economic demographics. And that's still where we have this performance gap. I don't think Act 46 looks at that. And that's something that I've been talking about since I've been in the legislature, and I want to get the conversation back on education and not so much about property taxes and governance. And that's what Act 46 focuses on. I think the other problem that's happening is that Act 46 was passed. You have some pieces of legislation there. How it's being implemented and interpreted by the Agency of Education is where we're running into some problems here. And I think we need some clarifications on that because it's not been consistent, questionably whether it's with the intent of the law. And that's something that we go back and forth with the administration on any law, is we put something out there and how it gets interpreted may be different from what we think our intent is. And so we have to continue that conversation.
Let's shift.
The other
go ahead.
one last thing.
Sure.
We've now had some experience in terms of what has happened at the local level as school districts have gone through the process. Some have been successful. Some are. I read the paper this morning. They're putting it off for another year to give it more time, and to give us some time. Us, meaning the legislature, some time. To make those necessary changes that will facilitate their work in providing high quality, equitable education to all the students in Vermont for the least cost. And so this is a process. When something is the biggest single activity that government does and you change it radically, you have to go back and take a look at it. You just do.
Well, and similarly, again, healthcare and the continuing saga of Vermont Health Connect and trying to get that right and trying to provide, again, the service of healthcare versus the mechanisms of healthcare, kind of what you were speaking about with education, Mike. I think both the candidates of the major parties, Phil Scott and Sue Minter, are on record saying if it doesn't get fixed, they're willing to look at going to the federal exchange, at least temporarily, as they fix it. Is that something the two of you would support?
Yeah, nothing is off the table. What I want is for Vermonters to be able to access health care. And how we do that is I'm willing to discuss anything. And if it means going to the federal exchange, yeah, we can do that. But I'm not entirely sure that that's going to be the answer. I think I'm where the gubernatorial candidates are. I am willing to consider what will facilitate Vermonters getting health care.
Yeah, and I think both of them are talking about it as an interim step towards something else. But what do you think about that?
Well, again, I want to look at what was before then. As somebody who has worked in human services, I was getting tons of complaints before the exchange about the private companies. Not everything works perfectly. We have 200,000 Vermonters now under the Medicaid waiver. It's probably the biggest segment. It's important that we make sure everybody gets insurance. And one of the things, again, Governor Shumlin has done, we have the second best rate of insured people in our state. So the problem with the federal exchange is you still have to have a state exchange for those people on Medicaid. So Phil Scott has talked about maybe going to Connecticut and partnering with them. I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I mean, I want to be the priority of what happens here. We could have Connecticut give us a contract for plowing our snow, and they might give us a cheaper contract, but are we going to get the first service? I don't think so. The idea of going with another state doesn't make sense to me right now. Maybe a regional piece if a lot of people want to band together, because we'd have a bigger pool. The reality is there's no easy fix here. If we want to insure people, I mean, the alternative is what we had before, with a lot of people not having coverage. I'm ready to work with the system we have and continue to tweak it. Bottom line is we want people to have access to health care.
Yeah. Let's bring this back in district, back to Putney, Dummerston, Westminster, and talk about the economy. Obviously, the magic wand in all of this is being able to come up with more growth, but growth that is the Vermont way of growth, where it's sustainable, where it's something that doesn't compromise what we cherish about the Green Mountain State. Opportunities in your district for that kind of growth. Interested in hearing both of you in terms of what economic development you see as being possible there to help your community grow.
It's kind of interesting. I think all three communities have a different strategy moving forward in terms of what they see for themselves. And I'm only surmising from, afar, that Dummerston and Westminster essentially have become communities where people who go to Brattleboro and Bellows Falls, where there are larger employers, reside. That said, Putney, very active downtown growth is going on, and it's really kind of neat to see the town spiffing up, if you will. That said, the economic development in all three of the communities, there are home-based businesses, individual entrepreneurs who are artists, who are carpenters, who are tradespersons, and it's not the large, big building type of employment that seemingly is at the top of the list. Yes, there's a place for employers that are large, but that doesn't seem to be the mindset within those three towns. And as long as these individual entrepreneurs have access to capital, to inexpensive banking, to health care, to workers' compensation coverage for any employees they might have, that's what we can do, or I can do, we can do in the district to facilitate the type of economic growth that is there.
But you think the type of businesses that are there, you're talking about the small businesses, the artistic businesses, are
I
enough?
did a project once for the Bellows Falls Chamber of Commerce, and they wanted me to contact all the individual entrepreneurs from Saxton's River to Putney, and this was over a decade ago that I did this project. In those 13 miles of roadway, there were over 50 individual businesses. That's a lot of business in 13 miles. And if you think about it, you go one step beyond that and it's land-based. We are the biggest producer of organic vegetables in Westminster. We're the biggest producer of apples in Putney and over into Dummerston, so it's land-based and individual entrepreneurs that are the base of our community's economy.
Would you throw anything different into the mix, Mike, than what's there now?
Well, I think we are. And the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation has done a lot of work post-Vermont Yankee, even before then, to help organize how we build our economy here. And I think what David said, though, is talking to the reality of the postmodern economy. We're not going to have the big employers, the IBMs coming in. I'm not sure we want that. But the other piece I agree with what David said is diversified agriculture is really becoming one of the foundations of agriculture in Vermont. We have a lot of small producers who are producing our food locally, organically. Again, clean food moves to a clean economy. These are people, often younger people, and I just want to say it adds to the census figures that came in last year that just as many young people moved to Vermont as left, for those who are concerned about the exodus of young people. This is one way we can bring people in, bring younger people in, and keep them here. There's a lot of good stuff happening in diversified agriculture, organic agriculture, along with the mainstays of traditional dairy operations in Vermont. We've got a huge one in Westminster at Westminster Farms. We've got some smaller ones around. That's the way we create economic growth, along with the reality of the arts and human services community. And I think there's an interesting book out right now called Concrete Economics. And what it says is, starting with Hamilton and going up to Eisenhower, what government does best is help create infrastructure. And that's what we need to continue to do. Again, Governor Shumlin has rebuilt our roads, has rebuilt our bridges, and our electronic infrastructure more than anyone we've seen. And I think he deserves credit for that. That's what we need to continue the economy growing here. We need that infrastructure, most especially internet access. So I think we're on the right track, and I think we need to continue with that and be open to what new comes along. This is the 21st century. Children born today will probably see the 22nd century. I mean, it's staggering to think of we're looking ahead already. It's time to start living in the 21st century.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about agriculture, but in the context of water quality. Mm-hmm. The bill that was passed that really a lot of the attention was given to cleaning up Lake Champlain and some of the waterways, but some of the causes of the blue-green algae and some of the causes of some of our water pollution comes from agricultural runoff. There's a bit of a tension there, right? We have Vermont, where we have this agrarian state, but then we also believe in clean, pristine resources. And I know, David, this is kind of in your bailiwick in the committee that you serve on. Do you anticipate there being tension, and how do you work with agricultural partners to make sure that they understand their impact on the environment and the Vermont brand that they're part of too?
One of the things I have observed in participating in having passed the Vermont Clean Water Act is that there is a recognition and acceptance on the part of agriculture to be responsible to the environment, whether it's water or air or their neighbors. And I have, again, because of my length of service, watched a sea change in terms of the attitude of agriculture towards their responsibilities for the better. And so we're in a different place. And yes, agriculture is responsible for 40% of the contribution of phosphorus to Lake Champlain, and over here on the Connecticut side, Connecticut River watershed side, with us, it's the issue is nitrogen, not phosphorus. And there are other contributors, and the Clean Water Act didn't just focus on ag. Right now, with the new rule that is going through on the required agricultural practices thing, there's a lot of attention being paid to that right now. But municipalities, developers, forestry operations are all going to make their contribution. That said, we are going to try and help. This is not, you got to pay your bill, Joe, using Michael's line, but we understand that society benefits from clean water. We understand that there are pressures relative to agriculture, development, roadways, in terms of being able to pay for it. And now we're back to that discussion about taxes.
Right, because you talk about municipalities and you talk about private developers, they have the means to pay for some of these regulations that an agricultural endeavor would not.
If we can assist them so that it doesn't create a major impact in terms of your property tax rate through taxing carbon or something else that is polluting and puts our future at risk, then let's do that. Let's make those decisions, or I'm prepared to make them. So we're not picking on agriculture. The Clean Water Act is across the board.
No, I was picking on agriculture.
Oh, okay.
by asking that question, just in terms of that particular aspect of it.
Okay.
I totally understand you. Mike,
the other thing is that my contribution to our district and our valley is that I did not allow the bill to become a Lake Champlain-centric piece of legislation.
Yeah.
This is a statewide, all watershed, everybody in piece of legislation and public policy.
Did you want to say anything to that issue as well, Mike?
Government does have a role in leadership here. For instance, I was talking to the Goodells who farm Westminster Farms, big dairy operation. They said it wasn't that long ago the government was sending them bags of superphosphate and saying, put this on your manure spreader before you go spread manure. And now they're saying, well, we've got too much phosphate in the water. So we have to help set the standards and help farmers where they need help in changing to this, because it's not that easy to turn around a big operation like that. But I agree with David. The farmers are struggling a little with the RAPs, the new regs, but they're on board. They know long term this is good for everybody.
Yeah. Really quickly here, we're running out of time, but your two opponents running on the Republican side, both affiliated with Gun Owners of Vermont. The two of you have been on record as far as supporting more gun legislation, sensible gun legislation in terms of who has access to them.
Universal background check.
Sue Minter is somebody who says that this is a priority. I think she's been misquoted in terms of talking about it being her top priority or number one priority, but something that's important to her. What I wanted to ask was, given the culture that we have of guns in the state of Vermont, what do you think is possible going forward into the next legislative session? What could be possible to actually get passed?
Well, I think background check is sort of the entry issue into a discussion about guns, and responsible gun owners don't have a problem with background checks. At least wise, not based on polling that's been done nationally, polling that's been done here in the state. And, I own guns, I use guns, but I need a license to drive a car. We're not talking about licensing guns. We're talking about access for those that should not, or restricting access for those that should not have it.
But given the pushback, even among Democrats who vote in elections or in the House, do you think that's possible? Background checks?
I don't know, but again, I'm in this for the long haul, and we're going to keep having our discussion. And if we disagree, then we'll try and find out where is there an accommodation that pro and con and can reach. That's what the process is designed to do. That's what our forefathers and mothers decided they wanted to create a forum for debate, discussion, and resolution of the will of the majority.
Yeah. Mike, in the previous election to this one, you were directly attacked because of your stance on universal gun, background checks, I remember.
Yep, and again, but we passed a law last year. We passed a law that aligns with federal law, which says that convicted felons shouldn't possess. People have the right to bear arms, but they also have the responsibility to do so in a way that reflects Vermont values. Our state motto is freedom and unity. We have the freedom to do one thing, but we have the responsibility to the group to work in unity with others. I think it's important that we move forward. This is the 21st century on legislation that respects people's rights, but also respects people's sense of safety. And I think we can do that in this and other areas. We talked about the economy, we talked about the environment. This is a piece of social justice. There's some other issues I think we need to look at in social justice. How new Americans are treated in this country and in Vermont. In Windham County, as Curtis Reed will tell you, has the largest segment of minorities of any county in this state. This is good for us. Diversity is good. Diversity in nature is good. I want to move forward on all these issues, and it's important that we recognize the changing reality.
Yeah, I wish we had more time to continue talking about issues like that. We are just about out of time, and I want to give you both a chance to address the audience watching this now as we close out. David, why don't you get us started?
Well, I would like to thank people who have been watching this and listening to us discuss some of the issues that we will be addressing in the coming legislature. I do hope to go back, and because of that, I would like to ask you for your vote and support. November 8th is Election Day, and shortly, I think maybe even tomorrow, early voting opens. So go to your town hall. If you think you might be out of town on November 8th, go to your town hall, cast your vote.
Yeah. I want to thank you, Chris. I want to thank BCTV for once again helping bring more good information to our community. I want to regret a little bit that we didn't have a debate with all the candidates. We did have an agreement to do so, and then they backed out. I think it's unfortunate that the people won't have that opportunity, but I respect and really thank you and BCTV for putting this out there. It's an honor to serve people here in Vermont, in the Windham-4 district. It's also a great responsibility, but it's very rewarding. I appreciate the chance to give back to this community that's given so much to me. Vermont's beauty is obvious with its trees and hills, but the real beauty is in our communities and people, and that's why I've been working to bring people together in our communities, especially kids. I've focused on kids for a long time. Children are our future, and I want to continue to work for our children, but all those Vermonters that don't really have a voice at the table. So as we move forward into the 21st century, I would appreciate your vote to continue to serve, to listen, and to help Vermont take the best of the last century and bring it up into the 21st century as we move forward for all of us. So thank you for the opportunity.
All right. David Deen, Mike Mrowicki, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you out there for watching this edition of Meet the Candidates on Brattleboro Community Television. This episode will be made available on the website at brattleboro.tv.org. That's also where you can go to find listings as to when it will air on cable channels 8 and 10. As David said, please vote on Election Day or before. Early voting is open. Make sure you are registered and get out there and have your voice heard. Thank you.